Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: U.S. congressman who opposes China investment curbs won't run for re-election. China's Great Wall of Debt sparks credit rating outlook downgrade. Donald Trump's 2024 campaign, in his own menacing words. Isolated Putin set for own working visits to UAE and Saudi Arabia. Imagine a better climate pact than COP. U.S. congressman who opposes China investment curbs won't run for re-election. South China Morning Post. Patrick McHenry, the top Republican on the House Financial Services Committee, has announced that he will not seek re-election. McHenry, known for opposing controls on outbound investment to China, has served in Congress since 2005. He recently expressed reservations about an outbound investment provision in the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, which would require companies to notify the Treasury Department before making transactions in China and other countries of concern involving technologies with military applications. Bloomberg reports that the provision is set to be dropped from the final version of the defense spending bill due to pressure from McHenry. China's Great Wall of Debt sparks credit rating outlook downgrade. Telegraph. Moody's has downgraded China's credit outlook due to concerns over mounting debts in the country. The ratings agency cut its outlook from stable to negative and warned of the challenges facing policymakers in managing debts from state-owned enterprises and controlling a property crisis. The downgrade increases the risk of a full downgrade from China's A1 investment grade rating in the next 18 months. Moody's also warned of the risks posed by President Xi Jinping's crackdown on big tech and the education sector, which could deter private investment and weigh on economic growth. Donald Trump's 2024 campaign, in his own menacing words. Yahoo! Donald Trump's language has grown harsher and more extreme as he campaigns for another term in the White House, with many democracy experts expressing deep concern. He has made anti-democratic statements, praised autocratic leaders, and continued to claim that the 2020 election was stolen. Trump has threatened to use the power of the presidency against his political opponents, made dozens of false or misleading statements, and advocated violence. He describes U.S. politics in apocalyptic terms, calling the 2024 election our final battle and describing himself as his supporters' retribution. Many Americans have only heard snippets of these statements because Trump makes them on his niche social media platform, Truth Social, or at campaign events that receive less media coverage than when he first ran for president 8 years ago. Trump's rhetoric and behavior have raised concerns among democracy experts, who fear that a second Trump term would bring retribution and institutional destruction outside the rule of law. His language and tactics are seen as an existential crisis for the U.S. and a threat to democratic norms. Trump's extreme comments during the campaign include claims of election rigging, threats to use government powers to punish critics and opponents, personal attacks, claims of national decline, references to violence, promises of a harsh immigration crackdown, accusations that the justice system is rigged, false accusations related to the 2020 election, comparisons to undemocratic countries, and admiration for authoritarian leaders. Trump's words offer a preview of what a second term might look like, and many experts are deeply alarmed by the implications. Isolated Putin set for own working visits to UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Independent. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to travel to Saudi Arabia and the UAE this week, highlighting his international isolation over his war against Ukraine. The visits come at a time of active discussions in the region among the OPEC group, and oil policy talks are likely to be a key part of Putin's conversations. This will be a rare trip overseas by the Russian president since he launched his military invasion of Ukraine. ICC signatory nations in Europe, such as Germany, have said that if Putin steps foot on their soil, they would be obliged to arrest him. Imagine a better climate pact than COP. Reuters breaking views. The annual United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP, is unlikely to achieve significant progress in the fight against climate change as it requires consensus from all 197 participating countries. Instead, a more effective approach would involve a few powerful nations setting ambitious targets and then encouraging others to follow suit. However, this will only be possible if the United States and China take the lead, and currently neither country is willing to cut their own carbon emissions at the necessary pace. The COP process, which has resulted in deals lacking teeth, has been ineffective in limiting global warming. An alternative approach would involve the US and China agreeing to much more substantial emissions reductions and then bringing other major polluters, such as Russia, India, Brazil, and Indonesia, into the fold. Wealthier nations within the Group of 20, G20, could help less prosperous countries transition to greener economies. The G20 collectively accounts for 74% of emissions, and if the majority of its members agreed to this approach, they could encourage the rest of the world to follow suit. Japan's frontier islanders decry lack of plan to aid Taiwanese fleeing attack. Reuters. Residents of Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan, are concerned about a potential refugee crisis if conflict were to break out between Taiwan and China. Yonaguni is located just 110 kilometers from Taiwan, and some residents fear that the island would be overwhelmed by refugees if the conflict escalated. Although Japan has embarked on a significant defense buildup, it has not made any preparations to deal with a humanitarian crisis on Yonaguni. In interviews with Reuters, current and former Japanese officials and residents criticized the government for its lack of planning and response to their concerns. Some U.S. officials predict that China could invade Taiwan by 2027. Concerns over the potential for a refugee crisis are increasing as Beijing continues to put pressure on Taiwan ahead of the country's presidential election on January 13. Japan's cabinet secretariat declined to comment on whether there was a specific plan for Yonaguni and said it did not know whether the island's mayor had directly appealed for help. Surprise to us, Chinese giant that owes billions saved from collapse by shock decision. The Sydney Morning Herald. China Evergrande, once China's biggest property developer, has been given 2 more months to work out a deal with foreign investors who lost money when the company defaulted 2 years ago with hundreds of billions of dollars in debt. A Hong Kong bankruptcy judge had said in October that she was ready to order the liquidation of Evergrande if it could not reach an agreement with its creditors on how to divide some of the company's remaining assets. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Six bringing you the latest news from the 6 dimensions. Today, we have quite a diverse range of stories to cover, from politics to economics to climate change. So let's dive right in. First up, U.S. Congressman Patrick McHenry has announced that he will not seek re-election. McHenry, known for opposing controls on outbound investment to China, has been a prominent figure in Congress since 2005. His recent reservations about an outbound investment provision in the National Defense Authorization Act have put pressure on dropping the provision. It seems that McHenry's stance on China's investment curbs has had an impact on the final version of the defense spending bill. Moving on, Moody's has downgraded China's credit outlook due to concerns over mounting debts in the country. The ratings agency warns of the challenges policymakers face in managing debts from state-owned enterprises and controlling a property crisis. This downgrade increases the risk of a full downgrade from China's A1 investment grade rating. Moody's also highlights the risks posed by President Xi Jinping's crackdown on big tech and the education sector. It seems like China's Great Wall of Debt is causing some cracks in its credit outlook. In the world of politics, Donald Trump's campaign for a second term in the White House is causing alarm among democracy experts. Trump's language has become harsher and more extreme, with anti-democratic statements, praise for autocratic leaders, and continued claims of election fraud. His extreme rhetoric and behavior are seen as a threat to democratic norms and raise concerns about retribution and institutional destruction outside the rule of law. It's a preview of what a second Trump term might look like, and many experts are deeply alarmed. Now, let's talk about Russian President Vladimir Putin. Despite his international isolation over the war against Ukraine, he is set to travel to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Oil policy talks are likely to be a key part of Putin's conversations, especially with active discussions in the OPEC group. However, some European nations, such as Germany, have made it clear that if Putin steps foot on their soil, they would be obliged to arrest him. It seems like Putin's travel plans are not without some risks. Shifting gears to climate change, the annual United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP, is unlikely to achieve significant progress in the fight against climate change. The COP process, which requires consensus from all participating countries, has been ineffective in limiting global warming. A more effective approach would involve a few powerful nations, like the US and China, setting ambitious targets and encouraging others to follow suit. Wealthier nations within the G20 could also help less prosperous countries transition to greener economies. It's a different approach that might just have more teeth in the fight against climate change. Lastly, residents of Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan, are concerned about a potential refugee crisis if conflict were to break out between Taiwan and China. With Yonaguni located just 110 kilometers from Taiwan, residents fear being overwhelmed by refugees if the conflict escalates. However, Japan has not made any preparations to deal with such a humanitarian crisis. This lack of planning and response from the government has drawn criticism from officials and residents alike. It's a situation that needs attention, especially as tensions rise in the region. And that's a wrap for today's news. We've covered a range of topics, from politics to economics to climate change. Now it's time for your thoughts and questions. What are your ideas on these stories? Do you have any burning questions? Let's hear it from you. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.